My son can't stop humming the same tune, and it's starting to freak me out. It began last Monday. I was still half asleep at my desk when my phone started buzzing. The name on the screen made my stomach clench. Coach Morris, Riley's basketball coach. My son wasn't the type to get in trouble at school. He was shy, polite, and the kind of kid who would rather spend hours gaming than running drills on a court. I made him join the church league after classes, not because he begged for it, but because I thought some exercise and teamwork would be good for him. So when I picked up the call and heard the hesitation in Coach's voice, a cold wave rolled over me. He explained that Riley had been acting odd, not disruptive exactly, but unsettling. The incident that forced him to call me was simple, yet strange. Riley had somehow popped 2 basketballs in the locker room. Old ones, yes, but still, they'd been sitting in a bin untouched for weeks, and Riley hadn't been with anyone else when it happened. I rushed over to the school gym, hoping it was a misunderstanding. Coach met me by the bleachers, holding the 2 ruined balls in his arms like deflated lungs. He repeated his story, emphasizing that Riley wouldn't explain what happened. No tantrum, no fight with another boy, just silence. I spotted Riley sitting on a bench at the far end of the gym, his face illuminated by the pale glow of his phone. His posture was strange, shoulders slightly hunched, his body swaying forward and back in a rhythm only he seemed to feel. As I approached, I called his name once. No response. Twice. Still nothing. By the 3rd time, my voice sharp and echoing through the gym, he finally looked up. And he smiled. Not the goofy, sheepish smile I knew from my son, but a small, deliberate curve of the lips, like he was in on a private joke. I asked him directly, "How did you pop the balls?" He only shrugged, as though the question barely deserved an answer. That was when I heard it. Faint at first, but unmistakable. A soft humming. It was a tune I didn't recognize, at least not immediately. High-pitched, drawn out, strangely childish but warped, like a nursery rhyme slowed down and twisted. The hairs on my arms prickled as the sound reached me. I ordered Riley to stand, certain he must be hiding something sharp. A pocket knife, a pin, maybe even one of those little tools kids collect. Nothing about the situation made sense otherwise. But when he stood, empty-handed, all I could do was sigh. I apologized to Coach, promising I'd replace the equipment. I made it clear Riley would pay from his piggy bank. Consequences had to be real, no matter how odd the behavior. When I told him to say sorry, he did, dragging the word into a long, exaggerated moan that made my skin crawl. Then he smiled again. We drove home in silence. I ordered him upstairs to fetch $50 from his savings. He nodded, obedient. Though as he climbed the stairs, I could hear that strange tune again, his humming echoing off the walls. When he came back down and handed me the bills, I asked him, "What's that song you keep humming?" He blinked at me, puzzled. "What song?" I repeated myself, and he shook his head. I wasn't humming anything. The tone in his voice was so flat, so certain, I almost believed him. Almost. I rolled my eyes, let him stomp back to his room, and told myself it was just some phase, some weird quirk. But that night, after hours of hearing nothing, I knocked on his door around 11 to tell him it was time for bed. As I lingered outside, hand still on the doorknob, I heard it again, the same childish humming, faint but steady, drifting through the wood. A shiver ran through me. I pressed my forehead against the door, listening longer than I cared to admit, trying to place the tune. It nagged at me until I remembered. An old cartoon soundtrack from when I was a kid. Something silly, something harmless. Except Riley's version was stretched, distorted, almost mocking. I pushed the memory aside and went to bed, but the sound burrowed into my skull. The next day was Tuesday, and like every week, Riley was supposed to spend 2 hours after school at his friend Will's house. Will's mom, Linda, usually picked them up together. It was an arrangement that gave me time to finish at work before rushing home. When I arrived at Linda's house that evening, she met me in the living room with a look that wasn't quite anger, but wasn't exactly calm either. She explained that Riley had spent nearly the entire time locked in the bathroom. At first, she assumed he was sick, but when Will knocked to check, Riley refused to come out, insisting he was busy. My stomach knotted. At 12, Riley was getting to that age where my mind jumped to embarrassing possibilities, things I'd rather not imagine, let alone discuss with another parent. I whispered as much to Linda, but she shook her head. Will said he was watching something on his phone, something he wouldn't share. Heat flooded my cheeks. I began stammering apologies, but before I could finish, Linda called Will over from the couch where he was glued to his own device. "Sweetheart, tell us what Riley was doing," she coaxed. Will shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact. "It's nothing," he muttered. "Is it inappropriate?" Linda's voice dropped, cautious. "Gross, no." Will wrinkled his nose. Relief washed over me, but only for a second. Linda pressed him further. "What was it then?" Will's eyes darted toward the upstairs balcony. Before he could speak, the sound of footsteps caught our attention. Riley was already descending the staircase. He smiled and waved at Will as though nothing had happened, then strolled out the front door. I hurried after him, apologizing to Linda with a weak smile. She looked baffled, but didn't push. Outside, Riley was already in the passenger seat of my car. I could have sworn I'd locked it. The drive home was torture. Every attempt to ask him about it, the bathroom, or even the basketballs, was met with dismissive chuckles. Not angry, not defensive, just a kind of sarcastic amusement that wasn't like him. Finally, as we pulled into the driveway, Riley turned to me. For a fleeting moment, I thought I saw my real son in his eyes again. "Sorry, Mom," he said quietly. But then, almost instantly, he began rocking his head from side to side, humming that dreadful tune once more. He grabbed his backpack and vanished inside the house before I could respond. I stood in the car for several minutes, debating whether to call his father. Kyle would only scoff, lecture me about being too soft, remind me of all the parenting decisions he disagreed with. Instead, I called my older brother Ian. I unloaded everything: the basketballs, the bathroom, the humming. He listened, then said it was probably just a weird puberty phase. Boys experiment, they act strange, they test limits. His tone grew sharper as I tried to argue, and before I could get another word in, he told me to leave it alone and abruptly hung up. That, more than anything, unsettled me. Ian had never hung up on me before. When I finally stepped inside, Riley was on the couch. He snapped his head up as I entered, then quickly tapped something on his phone. "What are you watching?" I asked, reaching for the device. "Nothing. My phone's dead," he replied, crisp and rehearsed. Suspicious, I grabbed it anyway. The screen lit up long enough to display the empty battery symbol before fading again. He wasn't lying. Still, something in his voice wasn't right. Too polished, too adult. Not my Riley. As he climbed the stairs, he began humming again. I snapped, begging him to stop, telling him it scared me. He froze. Slowly, he turned back, his expression unreadable, his eyes almost glassy. He opened his mouth as if to speak, then shut it again. He repeated the motion several times, like a puppet on broken strings. Then, with deliberate slowness, he began walking backwards up the stairs, never breaking eye contact. When he reached the top, he slammed his door. I stood at the foot of the staircase, heart hammering. For the first time, I wondered if something inside my son had shifted, something I couldn't reach or reason with. That night, I lingered by his door, straining for sounds. But there was nothing. Silence pressed against the walls, heavy and suffocating. When I finally collapsed into my own bed, one thought echoed through my head. If this continues, I'll have to call Kyle, whether I like it or not. Wednesday morning was painfully quiet. Riley sat in the passenger seat on the way to school, staring straight ahead, posture rigid. I wished him a good day, but he didn't respond, not even a nod. As I watched him march toward the entrance, his movements struck me as unnatural. His back was straight, his gait mechanical, as though every step had been rehearsed. The dread in my chest only deepened when that afternoon, the school's number appeared on my phone. The school called me just after lunch on Wednesday. At first, I thought it was the attendance office. Maybe Riley had gotten sick. The voice on the other end, though, wasn't routine or polite. It was sharp, clipped, and urgent. The assistant principal asked me to come in immediately. She refused to explain over the phone, only repeating, "You'll understand when you see." My stomach churned the whole drive there. When I arrived, I was ushered straight into the main office, where 3 staff members sat around a low table. Their faces were tense, their eyes darting between one another as though none of them wanted to be the first to speak. Riley sat in the corner, arms folded, staring blankly at the floor. "Mrs. Keene," the assistant principal finally began, "we need to address an incident that occurred today in one of the girls' bathrooms." I blinked, confused. "The girls' bathroom?" She nodded stiffly. Several 6th graders reported hearing humming in the restroom between classes. When a teacher went to investigate, she found Riley inside, standing completely still in front of the mirrors. My heart thudded. The counselor leaned forward. He wasn't doing anything inappropriate, just standing there, but he refused to leave, even after being asked multiple times. I swallowed hard, trying to process. He must have gone in by mistake. Kids wander sometimes. The counselor shook her head. He wasn't lost. He said he was waiting. Waiting for what? I asked. This time, Riley lifted his head. His lips moved before any sound came out, like a cassette tape lagging before the music starts. Then, barely audible, for her. The words slithered through the office like smoke. I turned to him, my throat tightening. "Who's her?" I demanded. Riley only smiled, that same unnerving, secretive smile from the gym. The assistant principal quickly interjected, insisting that while no actual harm had been done, they had to treat the incident seriously. Riley was suspended for 2 days, just to give everyone space, and for his own well-being. I signed the paperwork with shaking hands, all the while aware of Riley watching me. He didn't fidget, didn't protest. He simply observed, eyes unblinking, as though this was all part of something inevitable. On the drive home, I tried to press him for answers. "Who's her?" I repeated again and again. Silence. Then, without looking at me, Riley began to hum. The tune was softer this time, almost like a lullaby. Each note stretched and warped until the melody seemed to bend around the air itself. "Stop it," I snapped, gripping the wheel tighter. But he didn't. His voice grew louder, vibrating in his throat, filling the car until I wanted to cover my ears. "Riley," I said, "stop." The humming cut off instantly. My son turned to me, his face blank except for the faintest shadow of amusement in his eyes. "You heard it too," he whispered. A chill rippled across my skin. "What do you mean?" I demanded, but he only turned away, staring out the window. That evening, I tried to ground him in normalcy. I cooked his favorite dinner, chicken stir-fry, and set the table. Usually, Riley would brighten at the sight of food, pile his plate high, and drown everything in soy sauce. But he didn't even touch his fork. He sat in silence, watching me with that same glassy stare. "Eat," I urged. "I'm not hungry." "You haven't eaten all day." He tilted his head. "She feeds me." My fork clattered against my plate. "What did you say?" "She feeds me." His voice was calm, casual, as though we were discussing homework. "Who?" I cracked. His smile widened, revealing too many teeth in the kitchen's dim light. "You'll see." I couldn't breathe. I excused myself, locking myself in the bathroom for 10 full minutes, clutching the counter until the dizziness passed. When I returned, his plate was empty. Every bite of food gone. He hadn't moved from his chair. Thursday was his first day of suspension. I left him home while I worked from the den, determined to keep a close eye. But by noon, the silence upstairs gnawed at me. I tiptoed to his door and pressed my ear against it. At first, nothing. Then, faint, muffled voices. Not humming this time. Voices. I froze. It wasn't a phone. I know the tinny echo of a speaker when I hear one, and this was different. It was low, layered, like multiple people speaking in unison. My knees weakened. I knocked sharply. Silence. I threw the door open. Riley sat cross-legged on the bed, phone on the nightstand, screen dark. His head tilted toward me, expression eerily neutral. "Who were you talking to?" I asked. "No one." I heard voices. It was the TV. There was no TV in his room. I pointed to his phone. "Show me." He handed it over without hesitation. I unlocked it, scrolling through recent apps, texts, calls. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. No open videos, no messages, no sign of sound. I tossed it back to him, defeated. Before I left, I asked one more time. "Riley, who's her?" He smirked. "She doesn't like when you ask." The door shut in my face. That night, sleep was impossible. Every creak of the house set my nerves on edge. Around 2 a.m., I finally drifted into a light doze, only to jolt awake minutes later. Humming. Not from his room this time. From downstairs. I grabbed my robe and crept to the landing. The tune floated up from the living room, carrying through the still air. My son sat in the dark, facing the front window. The curtains were drawn back, moonlight spilling over him like silver paint. He rocked gently, humming, staring out into the night. I whispered his name. No reaction. I tried again, louder. Finally, he stopped. Slowly, his head turned toward me, eyes reflecting the pale light. "She's almost here," he said softly. Then he turned back to the window, resuming that dreadful melody. I wanted to scream, to shake him, to call Kyle, to call someone. But all I could do was stand frozen at the top of the stairs, heart pounding, while my son waited for something or someone I could not see. By Friday morning, I couldn't take it anymore. 2 days of watching Riley hum and stare at shadows had shredded every nerve in my body. I hadn't slept. My skin buzzed with a constant tension, like static trapped beneath it. Every sound in the house made me jump. So I did the thing I had been avoiding. I called Kyle. His voice was groggy, annoyed, as though I'd woken him from the sleep of the dead. "What now?" he asked. The moment I heard his tone, I regretted dialing, but I forced the words out. I told him about the basketballs, the bathroom, the suspension, about the humming and the late-night vigil by the window. For a long time, he said nothing. Then, "Jesus, Claire, he's 12. Kids are weird at 12. My throat tightened. "This isn't puberty, Kyle. This is wrong. He keeps talking about some her. He says she feeds him. He hums this awful tune, like he's not even—" "You're overreacting." His voice cut sharp, final. "You've always done this. Every time something's off with him, you spin it into a crisis." I clenched my fist around the phone. "Come over. Just see him." "I'll come by tonight," he sighed, "but only so you'll stop calling me about it." When Kyle showed up that evening, he still had his work clothes on, tie loose, eyes tired. He looked around the house as if he expected to find a disaster, but saw only clutter and a frazzled ex-wife. "Where is he?" he asked. "In his room." Kyle trudged upstairs and I followed. Riley was lying on his bed, arms folded across his chest, staring at the ceiling. He didn't move when the door opened. "Hey, bud," Kyle said, his voice artificially bright. No response. Kyle stepped closer. "Are you ignoring me now?" Riley's eyes slid toward him, slow and deliberate. "She doesn't like you." The words fell like stones into the silence. Kyle glanced back at me, eyebrows raised, and then forced a laugh. "Who's she? Your mom got you watching horror movies again?" Riley's lips curved into that uncanny smile. "She says you shouldn't be here." My breath hitched. But Kyle only rolled his eyes. "Great. Imaginary friend phase. Congratulations, Claire. He's normal." I snapped. "Does that look normal to you? He hasn't eaten, hasn't slept, and he just sits there, humming like—" Kyle cut me off, holding up his hands. "Enough. You're feeding into it. The more you push, the more he'll act out. Ignore it, and it'll pass." But I couldn't ignore it. Not when Riley's eyes followed us as we left the room, not when his humming started up again the moment the door shut. Later that night, Kyle insisted on staying over, just in case. He sprawled on the couch, flipping through channels, while I sat rigid in the armchair, listening for sounds upstairs. Sometime past midnight, I must have drifted off. When I woke, the TV was off, and the house was silent. Too silent. I climbed the stairs, every step aching with dread. Riley's door was open. His bed was empty. A thin thread of humming carried from the bathroom. I pushed the door open. Riley stood in front of the mirror, barefoot, pajamas rumpled. His reflection should have been there, clear and perfect, but it wasn't. The mirror showed him, yes, but slightly delayed, as if the glass was a fraction of a second behind his real movements. His head tilted right, and the reflection followed just a beat too late. My breath caught. "Riley?" He didn't turn. He raised one hand and pressed it flat against the glass. "She's almost here," he whispered. I staggered back, my shoulder hitting the doorframe. "Who, Riley? Who is here?" His eyes met mine in the mirror, not in the flesh. The reflection smiled even though his real mouth didn't. I ran. Kyle was furious when I shook him awake. "Do you hear yourself?" he snapped after I poured the story out in a shaking voice. "Delayed reflections? This is what I mean, Claire. You work yourself into these hysterics, and then you scare him. You're scaring me." I begged him to check the bathroom himself, but by the time he stormed upstairs, Riley was back in bed, fast asleep, his breathing slow and steady. Kyle turned on me with tired disgust. "Stop. Just stop. He's fine. You're the one who isn't." The words cut deep. For a moment, I almost believed him. Almost. But then Riley rolled over in his sleep and began humming, low and steady, even as his chest rose and fell in perfect rhythm. Saturday morning, Kyle made breakfast as though nothing had happened. Riley ate every bite. Scrambled eggs, bacon, toast. He chewed methodically, eyes never leaving his father's face. "See?" Kyle said, gesturing at him. "Hungry kid, perfectly normal." I wanted to scream. Normal kids didn't hum songs they claimed not to know. Normal kids didn't stand in bathrooms talking to mirrors. Normal kids didn't whisper about her. But Kyle saw only what he wanted. When breakfast was done, Riley wiped his mouth with his napkin, placed it carefully on the plate, and looked at his father. "She doesn't like you here," he said again, voice calm and cool. Kyle chuckled, shaking his head. "Yeah, well, too bad for her." Riley didn't laugh. He just sat there, staring. By the time Kyle left that evening, my nerves were raw. He kissed Riley on the head, muttered something about me getting help, and promised to call next week. As his car pulled away, Riley stood by the window, watching. When the taillights disappeared, he whispered, "She's glad he's gone." I froze in the doorway. "Riley," I said carefully, "who is she?" He turned, that glassy smile spreading across his face. "You'll meet her soon." And then he began humming again, louder this time, so loud it drowned out my thoughts, vibrating in my bones, filling the entire house until I wanted to scream. By Sunday, I was unraveling. Kyle's dismissiveness still clung to me like smoke, but the humming hadn't stopped. If anything, it had grown worse, louder, longer, threaded into every moment of silence in the house. Riley hummed while brushing his teeth, while tying his shoes, while staring blankly out the window. Sometimes I caught him humming even when his mouth wasn't moving. That was the part that chilled me most, the low, vibrating tune, steady as a heartbeat, even as his lips stayed still. I told myself it had to be my imagination. Stress, sleep deprivation, anything but what it seemed. Still, by late afternoon, I couldn't take being trapped in the house anymore. I told Riley we were going for a walk. He slipped on his sneakers without complaint, humming softly under his breath as he followed me outside. The air was cold, the streets quiet. As we passed our neighbor's yard, Mrs. Palmer waved from her porch. "Afternoon," she called. "How's my favorite piano player?" She meant Riley. He'd taken lessons from her for years. But instead of smiling or waving, Riley stopped dead on the sidewalk and stared at her. The humming grew louder, spilling from him in eerie, precise rhythm. Mrs. Palmer's cheerful expression faltered. "That's quite a song," she said uncertainly. Riley tilted his head, eyes never leaving her. Then in a flat, almost mechanical voice, he asked, "Do you want to meet her too?" My blood iced. Mrs. Palmer blinked, unsettled. "Meet who, dear?" Riley's smile spread slowly. "She's waiting." I grabbed his arm and yanked him down the sidewalk before Mrs. Palmer could respond. She didn't call after us. When I dared to glance back, she was still standing there, hand frozen halfway in a wave, her face pale. That night, I tried locking my bedroom door. I told myself I needed just one night of rest, one night without pacing outside Riley's room listening for sounds. At 3 a.m., the humming seeped through the walls. Anyway, I pressed my pillow over my head, but the tune vibrated through the mattress, rattling through the wooden frame. It wasn't in the air anymore. It was inside the house, embedded in the beams and drywall. And then, beneath the humming, came whispers. At first I thought it was Riley talking in his sleep again, but the voices were too many, layered and overlapping, whispering in tones that didn't belong to a child. I pressed my ear to the wall. Almost here. Hungry. Waiting. I recoiled, my pulse slamming in my throat. When I forced myself to the hallway, Riley's door was wide open. He was gone. Panic shot through me. I tore through the house calling his name until I found him in the basement. The lights were off. He stood barefoot on the concrete floor, facing the far corner, his hands spread against the wall as though feeling for something. "Riley!" He didn't turn. He whispered something, too low to hear. I stepped closer, heart hammering. "What are you doing down here?" This time his voice rose, sharp and clear. "She's behind the wall." I stumbled back. Riley pressed his ear to the cement, smiling. "She talks to me when you're asleep." My throat closed. I rushed forward, grabbing his shoulders and spinning him around. His skin was ice cold. His eyes gleamed with unnatural brightness in the dark. "She's almost here," he said again, louder this time, his voice not quite his own. I dragged him upstairs, ignoring his protests, and locked the basement door. My hands shook so badly, I could barely twist the key. The next morning, I called Ian again. This time, I didn't bother with excuses. I told him everything. The bathroom, the humming, the voices in the walls. I expected him to laugh, or to accuse me of dramatics. Instead, he was quiet. Too quiet. Finally, he said, "Don't let him near mirrors or windows." I froze. "Why?" "Just don't." "Ian, what are you talking about?" "I'll come by tonight. Don't let him out of your sight until then." The line went dead. That afternoon, Riley's suspension ended. He was supposed to return to school Monday. But when I called the assistant principal to confirm, she hesitated. "To be frank, Mrs. Kane, the staff is unsettled. We've had complaints. Other students don't feel comfortable around him. Maybe it's best if he takes a little more time before coming back." My stomach dropped. Complaints? About what? The silence on the line was heavy. Then, reluctantly, "They say he talks to himself, or to someone. They say he knows things he shouldn't. One girl claimed he knew her grandmother's name. She never told him. That sort of thing." I nearly dropped the phone. When I hung up, Riley was standing in the hallway, watching me. "She doesn't like them either," he said softly. By evening, I was counting the minutes until Ian arrived, but when I checked the driveway around 9, it was still empty. At 10, I called his phone. No answer. At 11, I called again. Straight to voicemail. By midnight, I was pacing, dread curling in my gut. I told myself maybe his car broke down, maybe he'd come in the morning. But deep down, I knew. Ian wasn't coming. At 2 a.m., the humming began again, louder than ever. It shook the windows, rattled the dishes in the cupboards. Riley's voice floated through the house, high and steady, threaded with that awful, twisted melody. And beneath it, the whispers returned. "She's here. Hungry. Open the door." I staggered to the hallway, clutching the wall for balance. Riley's bedroom door stood wide open, shadows spilling from it like smoke. He was standing there, framed in the doorway, humming, eyes wide and unblinking. "She says it's time," he whispered. And then, slowly, deliberately, he raised his hand and pointed at me. I don't remember walking back into my bedroom after Riley pointed at me. One moment I was frozen in the hallway, his humming rattling in my skull. The next, I was sitting on the edge of my bed, staring at my shaking hands. My skin felt fever hot, yet my bones shivered with cold. I told myself I'd wait for morning. If Ian still hadn't shown, I'd drive Riley straight to a hospital, to someone who could explain, to someone who could fix this. But morning never came. At 3 a.m., I woke to the sound of the basement door slamming open. My body reacted before my mind did. I was on my feet, heart slamming, sprinting down the stairs. The key I'd left in the lock was gone. From the basement, the humming rose. Not Riley's soft, nasal hum this time. This was deeper, layered, reverberating through the floorboards. Dozens of voices humming in perfect unison. I crept down the steps. Riley stood barefoot on the concrete again, this time with both hands pressed against the far wall. His lips moved, but the sound that filled the room wasn't coming from him alone. "She's here," he whispered. Then the wall shuddered. I swear to God, the cement trembled under his palms, dust trickling down in tiny streams. I stumbled back, choking on air that tasted metallic, like pennies pressed to the tongue. "Riley, stop!" I screamed. He didn't move. His eyes glowed faintly in the dimness, reflecting light that wasn't there. His voice rose, overlapping with the chorus of hums. "She's here. She's hungry." The wall cracked. Just a hairline fissure at first, spiderwebbing across the cement, but I heard it, like something pressing against the other side, desperate to come through. I lunged forward, grabbing Riley's shoulders and yanking him back. He thrashed in my arms with a strength that didn't belong to a 12-year-old boy. "Let me go," he snarled. "She wants me." "No." I dragged him toward the stairs, half carrying, half wrestling him as he kicked and screamed. His voice dropped low, guttural, not his own. "She'll eat you instead." I lost my grip for a second. His nails raked across my forearm, drawing blood. I cried out, hauling him tighter against me. Somehow, by sheer will, I got him up the stairs and slammed the basement door shut. I shoved a chair under the knob and collapsed against it, gasping. From the other side, the humming continued. The rest of the night was a blur. I held Riley in his room until his body went limp, his eyes fluttering closed as he fell into sudden, unnatural sleep. His breathing slowed, deepened, and the humming faded. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. When the first gray light of dawn seeped through the blinds, I checked on him again. He lay peacefully in bed, as though none of it had happened. His skin was pale, his lips slightly parted, but he looked normal. I almost believed it, until I noticed the wall beside his bed. A thin crack ran from the floor to the ceiling, jagged and raw, like the one downstairs. At noon, I tried calling Ian again, straight to voicemail. I called Kyle next, but his phone rang and rang before cutting off. I wanted to leave a message, to beg him to come, but the words lodged in my throat. What could I say? That our son was breaking open walls with his bare hands? That something or someone was trying to crawl through? Instead, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the basement door, the humming echoing faintly in my skull even when the house was silent. That evening, Riley awoke. He padded into the kitchen, hair mussed, eyes heavy. For a heartbeat, I saw my boy again, the sleepy kid who wanted pancakes at dinner time. "Mom?" he mumbled. My throat clenched. "Yes, baby." "Can I stay up tonight?" Something in his tone chilled me. Too rehearsed, too calm. "Why?" I asked cautiously. He smiled. "Because she's coming." I slammed my fist on the table. "Stop it. Enough. There is no she. Do you understand me? Whoever you're talking to, whoever you think she is, she's not real." For the first time, Riley's expression cracked. His smile collapsed, his eyes darkened, and his face twisted into something hateful. "She's more real than you," he hissed. I staggered back. Riley leaned forward, voice dropping to a whisper. "And she doesn't like being denied." I should have run. Should have grabbed my keys, shoved him in the car, driven until the road ended. But I didn't. I couldn't leave. At midnight, the humming began again. This time, it wasn't Riley. It came from the walls, from the ceiling, from the floor beneath my feet. The whole house vibrated with that awful, distorted melody. Riley rose from bed and walked to the hallway. I followed, trembling. He stood at the top of the stairs, arms outstretched as the cracks in the walls spread wider, splintering like veins. Plaster dust rained from the ceiling. "She's here," he said, smiling. And then the basement door burst open. What came out wasn't something I can put into words. A shadow, tall and thin, stretching across the ceiling. A shape that was wrong, too many limbs bending at impossible angles, a mouth that opened far too wide. But the sound, that's what undid me. The humming, magnified 1,000 times, vibrating through my bones until I couldn't stand. I dropped to my knees, clutching my head, screaming without sound. Riley didn't scream. He reached for her. "Take me," he whispered. The shadow enveloped him. I lunged forward, grabbing his wrist, yanking with every ounce of strength left in me. For a second, I felt both forces pulling. The shadow tugging him into its impossible shape, me dragging him back toward the light. "Let go," he told me calmly. His voice was not his own. "She wants you too." I held on. I held until my arms burned, until the room shattered with light and sound and the crack of splitting walls. And then, silence. When I opened my eyes, the house was still. The cracks were gone. The basement door stood closed. Riley lay on the floor, unconscious, chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. I pulled him into my arms, rocking, sobbing into his hair. He smelled of dust and earth and something metallic, but he was warm. He was here. For now. It's been 3 days since then. Riley hasn't spoken a word. He doesn't hum. He barely eats. He just sits by the window, staring at nothing. The cracks haven't returned, but sometimes at night I swear I hear it, a faint melody, just on the edge of silence. Sometimes, when I pass a mirror, I catch a glimpse of someone behind me. Not me, not Riley. Someone taller, thinner, waiting. I don't know how long I can keep her out.